These are the most shocking historical photos. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. Children of the Stark and Schwartz sugar beet families near Sterling, Colorado, 1915. These school-age kids worked in the fields from 5 a.m. to 6 p.m. with only a 30-minute lunch, over 12 hours a day. Indian troops walked through the ruins of a church in devastated Hiroshima, Japan, June 1946. Almost a year after the atomic bombing, the city was still a flattened wasteland of scorched foundations and twisted concrete. Australia, 1930-1970, part of the Stolen Generations program. A police officer removes an Aboriginal child from his mother so the state can place him in a white-run institution. Around 100,000 indigenous children were taken this way, deliberately breaking families apart. Enslaved boy in the Sultanate of Zanzibar, photographed as punishment for a slight offense, 1890. A wooden yoke, chain, and leg shackle were used to immobilize even children for minor rule violations. British field guns deployed in front of the Shwesendao Pagoda at Pi, Lower Burma, during the Second Anglo-Burmese War, 1852. The photo was taken by Scottish Army surgeon and pioneer photographer John McCosh, documenting Britain's expanding colonial presence in Burma. Trotskyist student factions and members of the Japanese Communist Party clashed with wooden staves in Japan, 1969. Rival left-wing groups often fought each other as fiercely as they opposed the state, turning campuses and streets into battle zones. Warsaw, 1981, under martial law, a 300-meter line for toilet paper. People had queued since 4 a.m. The shop would open at 9 and serve only the first 200. The woman holding ticket 847 already knew she'd get nothing, but she stayed in line anyway. Adolf Hitler addresses German students in the tennis hall at Furberliner Platz, Berlin, 17th of January, 1932. It was just months before he would leverage student and youth support to push the NSDAP into power. Tibet, mid-1960s, during China's Cultural Revolution. A Tibetan monk is forced to smash a Buddha statue from his own monastery while ranks of Chinese Red Guards watch. Thousands of centuries-old religious artifacts across Tibet were destroyed in similar struggle campaigns. Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge, 1975-1979. With schools shut, even 8-year-old children were sent to labor in the fields alongside former teachers and professionals. The regime tried to erase education and class enemies by turning everyone, including kids, into peasant workers. An emotional mother embraces her son, a Soviet soldier, just after he crossed back over the Soviet-Afghan border at Termez during the withdrawal, 21st May, 1988. After nearly a decade of war, thousands of families met returning troops like this. In relief, not victory. United States, 1927-1979, the era of compulsory sterilization. More than 65,000 people, mostly poor, disabled, or black, were sterilized without real consent under eugenics laws. Here, a nurse prepares a young woman for surgery, while the state has already decided she must never have children. Britain's first atomic weapon test on the Australian mainland, Emu Field, South Australia, 15th October 1953. The blast produced a towering radioactive cloud over the desert as the UK used remote Australian sites to develop its own nuclear arsenal. Japanese Karayuki-san prostitutes in British Singapore, 1904. During the Meiji Taisho era, Japan sent tens of thousands of poor rural girls overseas to brothels across Asia, Australia, and the Pacific. They served migrant laborers and colonial men, earning foreign currency for Japan. Albania under Enver Hoxha, 1967-1985, built about 750,000 concrete bunkers, roughly one for every 4 people. Many were poured by political prisoners, students, and enemies of the people, working in brutal summer heat with almost no supplies. Ireland, 1922-1996, the Magdalen Laundries, run by Catholic orders. Unmarried mothers, rape victims, and disobedient girls were locked in for years and forced to wash clothes 12 hours a day. unpaid. Around 10,000 women passed through this punitive system. 19-year-old Al Capone sent her with his father and uncle outside a pool hall, 1917. Before he became Chicago's prohibition kingpin, he was still just a Brooklyn kid in a family photo. 4 captured young mountain gorillas destined for the Antwerp Zoo, photographed in January 1928 for the Journal of the Bombay Natural History Society. At the time, European zoos routinely removed great apes from Central Africa, often after adults were killed during the capture. Soviet oil and gas field pioneers, 1973, the men who helped open up the USSR's new northern and eastern deposits. Their discoveries fed the Soviet energy boom that would soon supply half of Europe. Publicity still from the 1923 silent film The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Lon Chaney, in heavy makeup as Quasimodo, is shown on the pillory while Esmeralda offers him water, an iconic scene from Universal's early epics. Black Iranians dressed in royal-style attire, Qajar era, 19th, early 20th century. Persia's court and elite households often included Africans and their descendants, some of whom were raised and clothed like members of the royal household. Spain, 1939-1987, under Franco's regime. Up to 300,000 newborns were taken from unsuitable mothers, poor, unmarried, or linked to the Republic, and sold to loyalist Catholic families. Doctors falsely told the mothers the babies had died, while nurses quietly carried the infants away. Mexico City, 2 October 1968, the Tlatelolco Massacre. After the army gunned down 400 student protesters, the government cleared the bodies overnight. The next morning, only the shoes remained on the square, silent evidence of the people who never came home. Allied paratroopers descend over the Netherlands during Operation Market Garden, 17th of September 1944. It was the largest airborne assault of World War II, aimed at seizing bridges and opening a rapid route into Germany. Refugees on the move during the partition of India, August 1947. As Britain quit the subcontinent and created Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan, around 14 million people were uprooted in one of the largest population transfers of the 20th century. Soviet infantry marched through a shattered Kyiv shortly after its liberation from German forces, November 1943. The city had been occupied for over 2 years and was left a landscape of ruins and burned-out buildings. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel inspects German coastal defenses in Normandy, 1944. As commander of Army Group B, he was fortifying the Atlantic Wall against the Allied invasion he knew was coming. Brazil, 1964-1985, the military dictatorship's Dopes torture room. The empty frame is a pau de arara. Prisoners were tied by wrists and ankles to the bar, hoisted up, and shocked. After democratization, only the chains and cables were left, evidence louder than testimony. Iraq, 1988, the Anfal campaign against the Kurds. Soldiers strip a Kurdish woman of her identity papers before deportation. Passports, birth certificates, and diplomas were all seized. Without documents, the 182,000 people who were then killed and the thousands disappeared could be erased without a trace. Laos, 1964-1973. The U.S. dropped about 2 million tons of bombs here, more than on Japan and Wontaound, in a war that was never officially declared. Children now scavenge the bomb craters for unexploded ordnance to sell as scrap, risking death decades after the bombing stopped. Japanese officers salute the grave of a British soldier in British Malaya, early 1942. Even during Japan's rapid conquest of Southeast Asia, some fallen enemies were given formal military respect. A walrus being fed during a stopover in Fairbanks, Alaska, late 1970s, early 1980s. The animal had been crated and transported from an unknown location, likely en route to a zoo or marine facility. A scarecrow guards a coastal field left behind by a Japanese immigrant farmer from Los Angeles who was forcibly sent to an internment camp, March 1942. While he and 120,000 other Japanese Americans were incarcerated, Their farms and businesses stood abandoned. Baku oil fields, early 20th century. Forest of derricks on the Absheron Peninsula. Azerbaijan was then one of the world's leading oil producers, feeding the Russian Empire's industry, and later the Soviet economy. Papua New Guinea, c. 1975 to 1985. The Frelin, an East Timorese linked unit, was recruiting, often coercing, young women into military service. Many ended up pregnant by soldiers. The state reduced their choices to soldier or laborer, turning women themselves into a resource for the army. East Timor under Indonesian occupation, c. 1975-1999. Indonesian troops screen villagers, making them sit on the ground while soldiers single out suspected guerrilla supporters. Over 200,000 Timorese, about a third of the population, died from killings, famine, and displacement during the 24-year occupation. Myanmar, 1960-1988. Ne Win's military junta forced civilians to do unpaid labor for army campaigns against ethnic minorities. In the photo, villagers dig defensive trenches under armed supervision. Elders and children were also mobilized. Refusal often meant arrest, turning ordinary people into state labor. Prague, August 1968. Soviet tanks roll into the city to crush the Prague Spring reforms. Civilians watch in silence as Warsaw Pact troops occupy the streets and end Czechoslovakia's attempt at socialism with a human face. Alabama, 1912. Zuma sits with her American-born grandchildren. She was among the last Africans trafficked to the U.S. aboard the illegal slave ship Clotilda, which landed near Mobile in 1860. Normandy, June 1944. Brig. General Theodore Roosevelt, Jr., 56 years old and suffering from arthritis, landed with the first wave and walked the beach with a cane, the only U.S. general to do so. A week later, he died of a heart attack, but was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his leadership on D-Day. Berlin, May 1945. A Soviet soldier stands before the shattered Reichstag, the symbol of Nazi power, now in ruins. This scene marks the final collapse of Hitler's regime and the Red Army's capture of the German capital. Red Army Reconnaissance Group returns from behind enemy lines with a captured prisoner, Eastern Front. Even in blizzard conditions, Soviet scout units carried out raids to seize tongues, live enemy soldiers, for interrogation. Queen Elizabeth II prepares to deliver her annual Christmas broadcast, 1960. The televised address became a key way for the young monarch to speak directly to millions across the Commonwealth. Marilyn Monroe visiting U.S. troops in Korea, 1954. Fresh from performing for thousands of soldiers, she boosted morale on the front line at the height of the post-war tension. Germany, 1928. Reichswehr soldiers train with wooden mock-up tanks mounted on bicycles. Under the Versailles Treaty, they were banned from owning real armor, so they practiced future blitzkrieg tactics using these improvised panzers. USSR mid-1980s, during perestroika and state alcohol restrictions, Muscovites stood for hours in winter to buy vodka. The photo shows a line of several hundred people, a typical scene of late Soviet consumer shortages. Israel-occupied territories post-1967. Every Palestinian needed a permit to cross checkpoints for work or daily life. The photo shows an Israeli soldier inspecting documents while dozens wait in line, their movement fully controlled by the occupying authority. Lüneburg Heath, 4 May 1945. Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery accepts the surrender of all German forces in northwest Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands. This capitulation effectively ended the war for more than 1 million German troops in that sector. January 1959. Soviet leader Anastas Mikoyan examines cartons of vanilla ice cream in a U.S. supermarket during his visit. The trip was meant to study American consumer culture and food production at the height of the Cold War. Druze woman from Mount Lebanon, c. 1880 to 1890, wearing traditional high headdress and veil. Such portraits documented the distinct dress and identity of the Druze community in late Ottoman Lebanon. 1917, Japanese migrants bound for Brazil study Portuguese on deck aboard the immigrant ship Seattle Maru. Japan encouraged emigration to South America, where labor was needed on coffee plantations. German Central African Expedition, 1907-1908. A Matusi athlete clears a remarkable 2.50 meters in a traditional high jump. European explorers photographed such feats to document the physical skill of local peoples they encountered. Bordeaux, France, May 1968. Students and workers piled furniture, desks, and debris into the streets to block police during the nationwide protests. The barricades symbolized the challenge to de Gaulle's authority and the old social order. Dakota Territory, 1874. General George A. Custer leads a large U.S. Army column with wagons and cavalry across the plains, photographed by W. H. Illingworth. The expedition probed the Black Hills, foreshadowing U.S. incursions into Lakota lands. Binh Phoong, Vietnam, 7 Feb. 1973. A young female Viet Cong militia member carries an AK-47 and a plastic rucksack while shading herself with a conical palm leaf hat. Even rural women were armed to support the communist insurgency in the final years of the war. Dresden, Germany, 1945. A lone woman walks through streets reduced to rubble after the Allied firebombing. The once Baroque city was almost completely destroyed in February 1945. Sami man in Kautokeino, Norway, c. 1910-1922, wearing traditional winter dress and early snow goggles while holding the reins of his white reindeer. The photo by Peter L. Smith captures everyday Arctic life of the indigenous Sami herders. 25 November 1944, Lieutenant Yoshinori Yamaguchi's Imperial Japanese Navy, D-4Y-3 Judy dive bomber, makes its final plunge toward USS Essex in a kamikaze attack. He struck the flight deck and killed 15 American sailors. Sydney, Australia, 1915. Mrs. Esther Stace of Yarrowitch clears a record 6 FT6 in 198 mates while riding side saddle at the Royal Show. Her feat made her one of Australia's most celebrated early female equestrians. Pemberton, New Jersey, 27 Sept. 1910. 8-year-old Jenny Camillo works as a cranberry picker, photographed by Louis W. Hine. Her image became part of the National Child Labor Committee's evidence showing how young children toiled in U.S. agriculture. Peter, the Black Prince, Jackson, c. 1899. Champion heavyweight from Australia who was denied a world title shot because of his race. Even out of the ring, he dressed with the elegance of the era's top sportsman. Italy, 1940. Flamethrower operator wearing an asbestos-lined protective hood pulled up to shield his face from heat and backflash. Such gear was essential because early flamethrowers often burned the men using them. Canadian wildlife officers wrestle a sedated polar bear into a transport cage for relocation, 1st September 1971. The bear had wandered too close to people and was moved instead of being killed. Rare look at early Arctic animal control operations. Vietnamese militia woman stands guard over captured soldiers of China's 8th Army during the Sino-Vietnamese War, 1979. Beijing expected a quick punishment campaign, but within weeks, Chinese losses had climbed into the tens of thousands. German infantry advanced through the ruins of Stalingrad behind a Stug assault gun, 1942. The vehicle was used as moving cover to break into Soviet positions in the city's shattered industrial zone. Burned and injured civilians sit in the streets of Hiroshima after the world's first atomic bombing, 6 August 1945. Hospitals were destroyed and most medical staff killed, leaving survivors to wait outdoors for any treatment. Diane Arbus's identical twins, Roselle, New Jersey, 1967, became one of the most iconic images in American photography. A vintage print of the portrait sold for $698,500 at Sotheby's on 22 October, making it one of her most sought-after works. Young Marilyn Monroe, at the very start of her Hollywood career, poses while tending to twin babies during a 1947 publicity shoot. At this time, she was still being promoted as a wholesome girl-next-door model, years before she became a global sex symbol. U.S. black servicemen enjoy Coca-Colas and flirt with local women at an integrated bar during World War II, see 1940s. Scenes like this were rare at home because of Jim Crow segregation, but were more tolerated at overseas bases. Projectionists pose with their massive carbon arc projectors in the Majestic Theatre booth, Auckland, New Zealand, 1930. Early cinema required skilled operators to manage film reels, light sources, and fire risks during every screening. Crowds in Madrid give fascist salutes as the first volunteers of the Spanish Blue Division depart to fight alongside Nazi Germany on the Eastern Front, 1941. Franco's regime stayed officially neutral, but sent 18,000 men to help Hitler against the USSR. Woman tests Emerson Radio's new chairside console TV with a tiny 10-inch screen, 1946. Post-war companies marketed sets like this as luxury living room gadgets, even though early television images were small and grainy. Former Wizard of Oz Munchkin actors Parnell St. Aubin and his wife Mary Ellen Burbach opened the Midget Club in 1947. The entire bar was built at little person scale, so they and other performers could work and drink comfortably. Photo taken in 1968. Snow falls over rows of canvas tents in a Palestinian refugee camp in Jordan, 1969. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians lived in such harsh temporary camps for years after being displaced by the Arab-Israeli wars. Former Minnesota Governor Harold Stassen, serving as a U.S. Navy captain, shakes hands with newly liberated Allied POWs in 1945. Stassen had left office early to join the war, making this reunion with freed servicemen especially symbolic. French resistance fighters take up firing positions in the mountains, 1944. Maquis units like this harassed German forces and helped Allied troops after the Normandy landings. West Berliners crowd along a freshly built section of the Berlin Wall as an East German guard patrols the other side, August 1961. Overnight, families, friends, and commuters were cut off by barbed wire and concrete that would divide the city for 28 years. Eva Braun, Adolf Hitler's companion, poses in blackface in a private photo, 1937. The image was never meant for public view and shows how racist caricature was treated as casual entertainment inside the Nazi inner circle. U.S. Army recruits do mass calisthenics on a converted Miami Beach golf course, 1942. During WWJD, luxury hotels and resorts in Florida were turned into training centers, with fairways serving as drill fields and classrooms in the background. Worker fits an H.J. Holden powertrain into a locally assembled sedan at GM New Zealand's Trentham plant, Hutt Valley, 1976. To bypass import limits, Australia shipped CKD-SKD kits, and New Zealand factories completed the cars for its home market. French First Army troops in liberated Mulhouse mount a captured portrait of Hitler on their Jeep with the taunt, "Vive la France, he is ours," 21st November 1944. It was a mocking trophy showing how far the Germans had been pushed back into their own former territory. Marilyn Monroe arrives hand-in-hand with young actor Tommy Rettig at the Los Angeles premiere of The 5,000 Fingers of Dr. T, 11 October 1953. The two had just worked together on The Western River of No Return, and the studio paired them for publicity. Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus publicity photo showing 8 FT6 in Giant Jack Earl towering over little person performer Harry Dahl, c. 1930. Sideshows used such extreme height contrasts to draw Depression-era crowds. U.S. Marines moved through shattered streets with M26 Pershing tanks during the battle to retake Seoul, September 1950. After North Korea's invasion, UN forces had to fight block by block to push them out of the capital. Elderly Berliners rest among the ruins of their city shortly after Germany's surrender, 1945. Behind them, street signs now point in Russian, evidence of the Soviet occupation of the devastated capital. Young woman poses with an early Lawson motor bicycle, c. 1897. These pioneer machines could barely reach 19 km/h, but they were among the first steps toward true motorcycles. Exhausted U.S. Marine grabs sleep in his Jeep while a puppy tries to wake him during the bitter retreat from the Chosin Reservoir, Korea, December 1950. The campaign was one of the coldest and hardest fights of the Korean War. The overcrowded ship Vlora arrives in Bari, Italy, packed with thousands of Albanians fleeing the collapse of their communist regime, August 1991. Desperate passengers even jumped into the harbor to reach European soil. Formerly enslaved men, women, and children pose outside a building at the Faller Plantation near Cumberland Landing, Virginia, 1862. Labeled contrabands by the Union Army, they had escaped Confederate territory and were now under U.S. protection. U.S. 1st Infantry Division troops secure a tarp beside a 105mm howitzer as a CH-47 Chinook kicks up dust during Operation Junction City, Vietnam, February 1967. The massive airborne airmobile campaign aimed to smash Viet Cong bases in War Zone C. German POWs are made to wash a French Army Film Service Presse Cinema van, shortly after using it to exhume executed resistance fighters. Forced labor like this was common in liberated France to repair war damage and confront occupiers' crimes. Armed women of the Viet Minh's local militia, Tu Ve, march in Hanoi shortly before the December 19-20, 1946, uprising against French colonial rule. Ho Chi Minh's movement mobilized women alongside men in the first phase of the First Indochina War. Romanian physicist tests an early gas laser setup at the Institute of Atomic Physics in Bucharest, 1968. Eastern Bloc labs race to match Western advances in laser technology for research, medicine, and defense. Soviet police stand outside the first McDonald's in Moscow on opening day, January 1990. The Western fast food chain's arrival and the huge lines it drew became a symbol of the USSR's late Cold War openness to capitalism. Jimmy Carter takes the oath of office from Chief Justice Warren Burger as his wife Rosalind holds the Bible, 20th January 1977. He became the 39th President of the United States, pledging a government as good as its people. U.S. tank crew watches the newly built Berlin Wall while an East German border guard patrols on the other side, 1961. For weeks, Allied and Soviet forces faced each other at close range in the divided city. Maori guide Rangitiaria Denon, Guide Rangi, escorts U.S. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt through the Whakarewa thermal area in Rotorua, New Zealand, 1943. Roosevelt toured Allied nations during W.Y.N. Sund to boost morale and inspect wartime services. Pit lane at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, 1953. Mechanics swarm over the sports cars while crowds pack the grandstand to watch the world's toughest endurance race. U.S. Eagle Flight Hueys skim low while South Vietnamese troops slog through a flooded rice paddy during an anti-Viet Cong sweep in Long An Province, Mekong Delta, December 1964. Helicopter-borne raids like this became the hallmark of the Vietnam War. North African women of the Nylia, Ouled Nail tribe, in ornate jewelry and feathered headdresses, photographed by Rudolf Lehnert, 1904. Their embroidered robes and coin decorations signaled wealth and status in Saharan Algeria. Smiling Polish boy carries an armful of bread baked from Red Cross flour at a wartime evacuation camp, 1943. For displaced children like him, reliable food deliveries were a rare moment of security. Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi stands in prayer during a visit to the Imam Reza Shrine in Mashhad, 1961. Iran's monarch often highlighted such pilgrimages to show respect for Shia tradition despite his secular, westernizing rule. Berlin tenants display both Nazi and communist flags during a rent strike on Köpenicker Strasse, 1932. The banner reads, "Food first, then rent," a rare moment when bitter rivals briefly united against poverty and slum housing in Weimar Germany. 20 of the Oberlin-Wellington rescuers stand for a photo after being arrested for freeing fugitive slave John Price from U.S. Marshals in Ohio, 1859. The case inflamed Northern anger at the Fugitive Slave Act and turned Oberlin into an anti-slavery symbol. Japanese soldiers line up outside a military comfort station in occupied China, late 1930s, early 1940s. These brothels, supplied with coerced women from across Asia, were part of the Imperial Army's system of wartime sexual slavery. Crewmen of a TBM Avenger from Torpedo Squadron 31 scramble into the water as their bomber sinks after a failed landing near USS Cabot, 6 September 1943. Carrier flight ops in W. Boistas were so risky that ditchings like this were almost routine. Russian inventor Gleb Kotelnikov poses with a mannequin wearing his groundbreaking RK-1 knapsack parachute, 1912. His design let pilots jump safely from damaged aircraft and became the basis for modern parachute packs. RAF Bristol bow fighters of the North Coast Strike Wing roar past a German armed trawler under heavy fire south of Heligoland, 17th September 1944. These low-level anti-shipping raids hammered what was left of Germany's coastal convoys late in the war. Adolf Hitler waits in the rain at the Wolfschanze rail station to greet Mussolini, hours after surviving the 20th of July 1944 bomb plot. The assassination failed, leaving him shaken but determined to crush the conspirators. A downed German Messerschmitt, Bf 110, lies tangled in barrage balloon cables on a London street after being shot down during the Blitz, 10 October 1940. Crowds gathered to see the wreckage of the Luftwaffe that had just bombed their city. Italian and German troops walk in with hands raised to surrender to a South African soldier after the fall of Bardia, Libya, late 1941, early 1942. The Allied attack captured thousands and opened the way for further advances along the North African coast. German dentist Martin Hellinger stands to hear his 15-year sentence from a British military tribunal, 1946. He had extracted dental gold from murdered prisoners in a concentration camp, yet after his early release, West Germany later compensated him 10,000 DM. Only known photo of cornetist Buddy Bolden, widely credited by contemporaries as the musician who started jazz and his band in New Orleans, c. 1905. Bolden's career ended abruptly when he was institutionalized for schizophrenia at 30, and no recordings of his revolutionary sound survive. First Lady Florence Harding plants a southern magnolia on the White House grounds, March 29, 1922, a ceremonial tree that was later moved and, decades after, quietly removed during 2025 East Wing construction. German troops advance into the USSR during the first weeks of Operation Barbarossa, July 1941. A German flamethrower team attacks in a burning street while a panzer provides cover. This was part of the rapid push east that shocked Soviet defenses. In 1911, King George V spent 10 days on a royal hunt in Nepal with an entourage of about 12,000 people. The party killed large numbers of tigers, rhinos, bears, leopards, deer, boar, and birds, keeping the skins as trophies. The photo shows only a portion of the animals taken on that single expedition. In April 1865, the steamboat Sultana carried about 2,400 Union soldiers, 6 times its capacity. Around 2 a.m., its boilers exploded near Memphis, and the ship sank, killing about 1,160 people. German occupation authorities hold a rally in front of the burned city theater in Artemivsk, now Bakhmut, eastern Ukraine, December 1942. The building had been heavily damaged earlier in the war, but was still used as a backdrop for Nazi propaganda events. Princess Elizabeth, age 6, with her toddler sister Princess Margaret in 1932. Their father, the Duke of York, cradles Margaret. 4 years later, after her uncle abdicated, Elizabeth unexpectedly became heir, beginning the path to a 70-year reign. Leaders and officials tour the Great German Art Exhibition at the House of Art in Munich, year 1937. The show praised classical forms and large bronze figures, while many modern works were removed from museums at the time. A street in Grozny stands silent, its buildings ruined after months of urban fighting in the First Chechen conflict. From December 1994 to August 1996, the city's skyline was reshaped by the battles. Rows of winter tents fill Pike Island near Fort Snelling, where more than 1,600 Dakota people were held after the Dakota War of 1862. During the winter of 1862 to 1863, about 300 people died from cold and disease in the camp. German Red Cross medics stand with a trained rescue dog, First World War era, year 1914 to 1918. These dogs carried first aid packs and followed quiet signals to reach people in the field. Ralph Lazo, Wright, stands with friends at a wartime relocation camp in year 1943. He was the only known American who entered by choice to support Japanese-American classmates. Smoke rises around a stopped Soviet tank as a crewman raises his hands to Romanian soldiers, year 1942. On the Eastern Front, fast-moving battles often ended with sudden breakdowns and encirclement. A Larakia elder sits for a portrait in the Northern Territory, years 1870 to 1880. The raised lines on his chest are scarification, marks that can show family, ceremony, and milestones. The nose ornament and armbands signal cultural identity held with pride. Women walk a rural road near Vitebsk in year 1942, watched by armed men and local helpers. The image was shot from a German vehicle before an anti-partisan raid, and the road ahead was dangerous with mines. A young officer in a winter hat looks into the camera in Leningrad, year 1976. At the time, he served as a lieutenant in a Soviet state security unit. Two Igbo masquerade performers wear tall cone headdresses and full body cloth with bold patterns. Nigeria, years 1900 to 1910. Such masquerades, called manwu, appear at festivals to honor community, ancestors, and moral lessons through dance and drums. American and Soviet honor guards face each other at Spandau Prison in Berlin during the 1980s. The site held top Nazi leaders after the war, and Rudolf Hess was the last inmate, living here until 1987. A French soldier speaks with an older Vietnamese woman on a road in northern Tonkin, year 1951. During the Vinh Yen campaign that January, the fighting shifted the balance for a time and became one of the last major French wins in the region. Two Marine women show a fast hold and trip during training at Camp Lejeune, New River, North Carolina, June 18, 1943. That year, the Marine Corps created the Women's Reserve, and thousands learned field skills to guard bases and support the fleet. Soldiers of the 55th British Division walk in a line after a gas attack on April 10, 1918. Many wear bandages and hold the shoulder in front as they move to care. Outrage over such scenes helped lead to the 1925 Geneva Protocol, banning gas in war. During the high-growth years of the 1970s to 1980s, many factory workers in Japan kept very long hours. This man takes a quick nap on his machine during a 15-minute lunch. After year 1991, a former prison in Georgia became a museum. A long corridor of 1 by 1 meter cells shows plaques with names, lit only by a thin slot in each door. The tiny rooms turn silent memory into a clear warning. Venice, November 4, 1966. The worst flood on record raised the water to 1.94 meters, and even St. Mark's Basilica filled with water. People held ropes and waded through cold water to save belongings and cross the square. Rwanda, April, 1994. In a church many believed would be safe, empty benches and scattered shoes tell how fear swept through the town. The silent aisle holds what was left behind during days of mass violence. Alfred Hitchcock serves Grace Kelly tea on the set of To Catch a Thief, year 1955. Filmed on the French Riviera, the movie later won an Academy Award for its color cinematography. People crowd a market table for cuts of meat in the Soviet Union during the 1930s. Shortages and ration books shaped daily life, and a good spot in line could decide dinner. Army B-25. Mitchell bombers lined the deck of the carrier Hornet before the Tokyo raid, April 1942. This daring mission launched land-based bombers from a ship for the first time and lifted American morale after Pearl Harbor. Baltimore, after a February fire in year 1904, with about 1,500 buildings lost across 57 hectares. The event led cities to standardize fire hose fittings so teams from other places could connect and help faster. A wealthy man in Saigon shows long, curved fingernails, year 1869. In old Vietnam, such nails signaled high status because others did the manual work. The ornate album hints at a life of comfort. Kazakhstan, year 1949 to 1989. The Soviet Union carried out 456 nuclear tests. This village, about 50 kilometers away, watched the cloud with no warning. In later years, many families reported serious health problems linked to fallout. A young Soviet conscript waits in a rocky trench, face marked with dust. Many here were 18 to 20, serving in the mountains from 1979 to 1989, and letters home were often screened. His steady stare tells how long days can change a person. Clergy review donations and paperwork in a Vatican office, 1960s. The image echoes old debates about indulgences, which in modern teaching are tied to prayer and set works rather than payment. Los Angeles gathers to raise a new power pole at Pasadena Avenue and Piedmont Street, year 1916. The start of citywide electricity turned night into day and fueled fast growth across homes and shops. Graf Zeppelin passes over Montevideo in June 1934, gliding past the Palazzo Salvo. The airship linked Europe and South America with regular mail and passenger flights, turning long sea trips into days in the sky. Tenerife, March 27, 1977. Two large jets wait on a crowded runway in thick fog. Minutes later, miscommunication and low visibility would cause the worst accident in civil aviation history. Armored vehicles crowd a Moscow avenue as soldiers of the 106th Guards Airborne Division wait near the Parliament building, year 1991. During the August crisis, units were sent to pressure leaders, but many troops did not attack. A Finnish soldier carries a small fur through the snow near Valkeasaari, Russia, December 1943. The tree will brighten a dugout for Christmas during winter duty. A mother and two children wait with blankets and bags at a Canadian station during World War II. After 1942, more than 20,000 Japanese Canadians were moved to inland relocation camps. Many lost homes and boats and had to start again after the war. French artist Jean-Julien Lemordant sits in uniform with bandages and dark glasses, year 1917. He lost his sight in 1915 while serving, and after several surgeries regained vision in 1935. Queen Elizabeth visits an airfield in Cambridgeshire in February 1944, meeting flight and ground crews beside an Avro Lancaster. Wartime visits like this raised morale before long night missions over Europe. Gerhard Bast as a child with a first hunting gun in year 1914, and decades later as a uniformed Nazi officer. As an adult, he led a unit that carried out grave abuses against civilians during the war. Two gauchos face off in a ritual duel while two others watch and drink mate, Argentina, year 1930. Such contests were once tied to rural honor and skill on the Pampas. First Lady Mamie Eisenhower and President Dwight D. Eisenhower play Scrabble at Camp David, July 1954. Mamie loved games with friends, from bridge and canasta to this word game on quiet afternoons. An Israeli soldier dips a cup in the Jordan River after the Six-Day War, July 1967. A number from his wartime imprisonment in Europe is visible on his left arm, a quiet mark carried into a new uniform. Harlem, year 1935. Rumors about a boy's fate spread, and crowds filled the streets at night. Police tried to control the unrest as tensions rose across the neighborhood. Rubbish piles up on a Soho street during a sanitation workers' strike, February 1, 1979. It was part of the Winter of Discontent, when services stopped across Britain. Washington, October, 1962. In the White House map room, officers study a world map marked with missile sites in Cuba and their ranges over major United States cities. One chart, many paths, and every choice matters. Prague, August 1968. A young woman holds the Czechoslovak flag in front of a tank as Warsaw Pact forces move into the city, turning reform hopes into street resistance. The image became a quiet symbol of courage. Children from a London charity home crowd the deck of SS Sicilian before sailing to Canada in March 1920. Many would start new lives with host families across the country, a journey filled with hope and unknown paths. Silent film director and adventurer Ben Burbridge with Miss Congo, a young mountain gorilla in the Belgian Congo, 1920s. His bandaged hands show a recent bite, a reminder of how wildlife was handled in that era. Shipyard workers in La Boca, Buenos Aires, danced tango around year 1902. Early tango grew in port districts, and men often practiced steps together before the dance moved into salons and spread worldwide. Alberto Santos Dumont lifts his 14 bis into the air in Paris on October 23, 1906. It was the first public flight of a heavier-than-air machine in Europe, gliding about 60 meters before landing. Captured soldiers stand behind a rope line after the Battle of Blanquemont Ridge near Reims, year 1918. American and French units took the ridge in October and broke a key line, pushing the front toward the Ardennes. Engineers Niklaus Riggenbach and Olivier Schocke test a cogwheel steam engine on Mount Rigi, Switzerland, around 1870. Their Witznau-Rigi line became the first mountain rack railway on the European continent, climbing grades near 1 and 4 with a vertical boiler engine. German soldiers sleep shoulder to shoulder in a trench shelter in year 1915. Woven walls, hanging gear, and shared blankets show how men rotated rest between duty and shell bursts. Ukraine, year 1932. Officials collect grain under strict quotas as villages face a harsh famine that would take millions. The still winter scene shows how empty stores meant empty tables. Members of the year 1897 Arctic balloon expedition haul their boat sledge across broken ice after landing. Salomon August André, Knut Frenkel, and Niels Strindberg kept notes and photos that were found in 1930, telling their brave route. New Yorkers gather on a rooftop during the Cuban crisis, October 1962. They watch the sky in silence as the world nears war, and the next day, leaders step back with a deal. A cemetery in the former Yugoslavia stands divided by barbed wire in year 1995. Crosses and crescents face each other across the fence, a stark sign of how the war split neighbors even after death. Rows of shoes fill a hall at Yad Vashem in Israel, gathered from camps across Europe. Each pair stands for a life cut short. A small child's shoe in front turns the number into a face. Memory here is carried by the things people wore. Damascus, same street in year 2011 and year 2021. A lively market turns into a silent road of broken stone and shuttered shops. 10 years of conflict reshaped daily life more than any map can show. Portuguese Mozambique, year 1864, the last year before slavery ended in the colony. A planter stands with children held in bondage. The law would soon end it, yet payments went to owners instead of the people. A quiet picture of a system about to fade. German boys in uniform near the end of World War II, 1945. Many were rushed into service as the front collapsed, some only in their early teens. A woman in Myanmar uses a handmade water pipe around year 1900. The bowl and stem fit into a small pot, a style common across Southeast Asia then. A quiet moment from a century about to speed up. Indentured workers from India in Trinidad and Tobago, 1890. Families stand together in saris and headscarves, newly arrived and finding their place. A new community taking root. Buffalo Bill's Wild West show in Naples, Italy, 1890. Performers pose with wagons and horses, with Mount Vesuvius in the background. A curious meeting of the American West and an Italian volcano.